The silence in the dusty saloon grew deafening as Matilda Calloway clutched her swollen belly, her chin raised defiantly against the judgmental stares of Copper Creek's townsfolk. The year was 1879, and an unmarried woman with child might as well have worn a scarlet letter sewn to her dress. But before another soul could mutter another cruel word, the saloon door swung open, and a tall figure silhouetted against the harsh Arizona sun stepped inside. "That's enough," came a deep voice that silenced the room entirely. "Any man who speaks ill of Miss Calloway answers to me." Matilda turned, recognizing the voice of Kieran Thornton, the rancher whose land bordered the eastern edge of town. His weathered Stetson cast a shadow over piercing blue eyes that surveyed the room with quiet authority. Dust from the trail still clung to his denim and leather, but there was nothing tired in his stance. "This ain't your business, Thornton," muttered Walter Jenkins, the general store owner whose wife had been leading the crusade against Matilda since her condition became impossible to hide 3 months ago. Kieran removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair as he approached Matilda's table. "I'm making it my business." His voice carried no threat, just simple fact, which somehow made it more powerful. "Miss Calloway is under my protection now." The whispers started immediately. Matilda flushed with both gratitude and embarrassment. She'd spoken to Kieran perhaps 3 times in the 2 years she'd lived in Copper Creek, teaching at the one-room schoolhouse. What could possibly drive him to defend her now? He turned to her, his expression softening. "If you'll permit me, Miss Calloway, I'd like to escort you home." She nodded, finding no words as he helped her to her feet. The crowd parted, eyes downcast or glaring, but none daring to speak as he guided her toward the door, his hand barely touching her elbow. Once outside in the late afternoon sun, Matilda found her voice. "Mr. Thornton, while I appreciate your intervention, I don't understand why you'd risk your reputation for me." He secured her to his wagon before answering. "Folks around here have short memories, Miss Calloway. They forget that judging others isn't their right." He climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "Besides, I've watched you teach the children no one else would bother with, including half Navajo kids and the poorest ranch hands' little ones. You've earned better than their scorn." As the wagon pulled away from the saloon, Matilda studied his profile. Kieran Thornton was known as a fair employer and a man who kept to himself. At perhaps 30 years of age, he'd established one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory without taking a wife, which had been the subject of speculation among the town's unmarried women. "Mr. Thornton, your kindness won't change their minds. They'll simply include you in their condemnation." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Their good opinion isn't something I've ever courted, Miss Calloway." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels crunching over rocky soil as they approached the modest cabin at the edge of town that served as both schoolhouse and Matilda's residence. "There's something else," he said finally, as he brought the wagon to a stop. "I've been meaning to speak with you." Matilda felt a flutter of nervousness. "Yes." Kieran turned to face her fully. "This child you're carrying," he nodded toward her belly, "is my blessing too." Her eyes widened. "I don't understand." "I'm proposing a marriage, Miss Calloway." His directness took her breath away. "Not out of pity, but because I've admired you from afar for some time. Your child would have my name, my protection, and a future without shame. And you," he paused, his composure faltering slightly, "you would have a partner who respects you, if not the romantic match young women dream of." Matilda's hand instinctively went to her stomach. "Mr. Thornton, you can't possibly." "I can, and I am," he replied. "You need not answer today, but know the offer stands, and it comes from genuine regard." With that, he helped her down from the wagon, tipped his hat, and left Matilda standing in a cloud of dust, her mind reeling with the possibility of salvation she'd never dared hope for. The next morning dawned bright and merciless, the sun already promising a scorching day as Matilda prepared for school. The weekend was over, and despite her condition, she was determined to continue teaching until she physically couldn't. She'd come to Copper Creek after the death of her parents in Boston, seeking independence and purpose. The teaching position had offered both, until 6 months ago. She had just finished arranging the slates when a knock came at the door. Opening it, she found Mrs. Whitaker, the banker's wife and head of the town's committee for moral standards. "Miss Calloway," the older woman said stiffly. The committee has reached a decision. We feel it best that you relinquish your teaching duties immediately. Matilda felt the blood drain from her face. On what grounds, Mrs. Whitaker? I've fulfilled all my obligations. On the grounds of moral turpitude. We cannot have our children instructed by someone of questionable character. Mrs. Whitaker's eyes flicked to Matilda's belly. Sheriff Barrett will escort the children back home today. We've already notified the parents. You can't do this, Matilda whispered, though she knew they could. There was no contract that protected her, no law against dismissing an unwed mother-to-be. It's already done. You have until the end of the month to vacate this property. As Mrs. Whitaker turned to leave, Sheriff Barrett arrived with a grim expression. Behind him stood several children and their parents, watching the exchange with various expressions of curiosity, discomfort, and in some cases, poorly concealed satisfaction. Matilda straightened her back. I'll gather my things. The morning passed in a blur of tears she refused to shed in public, packing her few teaching materials while listening to Mrs. Whitaker instruct the children outside. By noon, Matilda had filled 2 trunks with her possessions and sat at her small table, wondering what remained for her in Copper Creek or anywhere. Another knock startled her from her thoughts. This time, Kieran Thornton stood at her door, hat in hand. I heard, he said simply. Matilda nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. My offer stands, he continued. In fact, it's become more urgent. She found her voice at last. Mr. Thornton, why would you do this? You know nothing about me, about my situation. I know enough, he replied, stepping inside when she moved aside. I know you're kind to those who need kindness most. I know you're brave enough to face this town alone. And I know that child deserves a fighting chance. Matilda studied him carefully. And what do you get from this arrangement, Mr. Thornton? A faint smile touched his lips. I get to stop eating my own terrible cooking, for one thing. Then, more seriously, I get to do something right in a world that so often isn't. And perhaps, he hesitated, perhaps I get a family. Something I'd given up hoping for. The child isn't yours, she said bluntly. I'm well aware. Don't you want to know whose it is? Kieran shook his head. That's your story to tell if and when you choose. It changes nothing about my offer. Matilda sank into a chair, overwhelmed. I would be forever in your debt. No, he said firmly. If we do this, we start as equals. Partners in this life we'd build. No debts between us. She looked up at him. This man she barely knew who was offering her salvation. When the circuit preacher comes through tomorrow, it could be done then, if you're willing. Matilda closed her eyes, weighing her limited options against the unexpected gift before her. When she opened them again, her decision was made. Yes, she said. I accept your proposal, Mr. Thornton. Kieran, he corrected gently. If we're to be married, you should use my given name. Kieran, she repeated, the name strange on her lips. And I'm Matilda, though most call me Tilly. He nodded. Tilly. For the first time, his smile reached his eyes. I'll return at sunup with the wagon for your things. We'll be married by noon. After he left, Matilda sat in the growing darkness, her hand resting on her unborn child. Well, little one, she whispered. It seems our fate has taken an unexpected turn. True to his word, Kieran arrived at dawn the next day, his wagon ready for her belongings. He'd brought along 2 ranch hands to help with the heavier items, both of whom treated Matilda with quiet respect. By mid-morning, her few possessions were loaded, and Matilda took one last look at the place that had been her home and workplace. They drove to the small white church on the edge of town where Reverend Williams, the circuit preacher, awaited them. Matilda had worn her best dress, though it strained against her growing belly. Kieran was freshly shaved, his usual work clothes replaced by a clean black suit that made him look both distinguished and somewhat uncomfortable. The ceremony was brief, with only Kieran's foreman and his wife as witnesses. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Kieran hesitated only a moment before placing a chaste kiss on Matilda's lips, their first touch of intimacy, over almost as soon as it began. Word spread quickly through Copper Creek. By the time they emerged from the church, a small crowd had gathered, some openly curious, others clearly disapproving. Marrying your own trouble, Thornton, called out Samuel Green, the saloon owner. Kieran's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, his new wife placed a hand on his arm. Mr. Green, Matilda said loudly enough for all to hear. My husband has shown more Christian charity and decency than this entire town combined. Perhaps you might reflect on that before passing judgment. A murmur ran through the onlookers as Kieran helped her into the wagon with a look of surprised admiration. They rode in silence until the town disappeared behind them, the vast expanse of the Thornton ranch spreading before them. The main house was larger than Matilda had expected, a two-story structure built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. A separate bunkhouse stood nearby for the ranch hands, along with a barn, stables, and various outbuildings that spoke of a prosperous operation. It's beautiful, Matilda said genuinely. It's home, Kieran replied. My father started with nothing but a claim and a dream. I've tried to build on what he began. As they approached, several workers paused in their tasks, nodding respectfully toward their employer and casting curious glances at Matilda. I should introduce you, Kieran said, helping her down from the wagon. They'll have heard rumors, but they deserve to hear the truth from me. He gathered his workers, 8 men ranging from grizzled veterans to fresh-faced youngsters. With straightforward dignity, he introduced Matilda as his wife and made it clear she was to be treated with all due respect. If any harbored doubts or judgments about her condition, they kept them well hidden. Inside, the house revealed a masculine simplicity, functional furniture, few decorations, and a notable absence of the feminine touches that might have softened the space. Kieran showed her to the main bedroom, which he had clearly vacated for her use. Where will you sleep? She asked, noting the fresh linens and the vase of wildflowers on the dresser, someone's attempt to welcome a woman to this bachelor's domain. There's another room down the hall, he replied. I've moved my things there. Matilda felt a flush of embarrassment. Of course, theirs was a marriage of convenience, not passion. Kieran, I don't want to displace you from your own bedroom. It's our home now, he said simply, and you need the space more than I do at present. His eyes flicked briefly to her midsection. We can discuss other arrangements after. Well, after the child comes. The awkwardness between them was palpable. They were strangers bound by vows, navigating an intimacy neither had anticipated. I should check on the cattle, he said finally. Make yourself at home. Mrs. Guthrie comes in to cook and clean 3 times a week. She'll be here tomorrow. Until then, there's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. After he left, Matilda slowly explored what was now her home. The kitchen was well stocked, but showed signs of a bachelor's neglect. The study contained shelves of books that surprised her with their variety, not just practical manuals on ranching and animal husbandry, but poetry, history, and even a few novels. Upstairs, besides the main bedroom, she found 3 other rooms, one now occupied by Kieran, one set up as a sewing room though it appeared unused, and another empty save for some stored furniture. Room enough for a nursery, she thought, then wondered if her new husband had considered the same. By evening, Matilda had unpacked her belongings and made a simple meal. Kieran returned as the sun set, bringing with him the smells of horses, leather, and the outdoors. He washed up at the pump outside before entering the house, his hair damp and his shirt clinging slightly to his still wet skin. You didn't need to cook, he said, noticing the table set for 2. I wanted to, she replied. It seems the least I can do. They ate in relative silence, broken only by Kieran's occasional comments about the ranch and Matilda's polite responses. After dinner, they sat on opposite ends of the sofa, the ticking of the clock accentuating the quiet between them. May I ask you something? Matilda said finally. Kieran nodded. You said yesterday that you'd given up hoping for a family. Why is that? He considered her question, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. I came close once. There was a woman, Hannah Mercer. We were to be married 8 years ago. Matilda waited as he gathered his thoughts. She died of fever 2 weeks before the wedding. His voice was matter of fact, but Matilda could hear the old pain beneath the words. After that, I put my energy into the ranch. Easier that way. I'm sorry, she said softly. He shrugged. Life continues. What about you? There must be a story behind your situation. Matilda tensed. It was a fair question from the man who'd married her, yet the truth was something she'd shared with no one in Copper Creek. His name was Edward, she began hesitantly. He was engaged to my cousin in Boston, but she twisted her hands in her lap. He was charming, persistent. I was naive. Understanding dawned in Kieran's eyes. He took advantage. Not entirely, she admitted. I made choices too. But when I discovered I was with child, he denied any responsibility. Said I was trying to trap him, that it could be anyone's child. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. My family couldn't bear the scandal. They gave me money to go west and start over, where no one knew me. And you chose teaching. Matilda nodded. It was all I knew. I managed to hide my condition for months, but eventually people noticed and showed their true colors, Kieran finished. Yes. She met his gaze directly. Now you know. Thank you for telling me, he said simply. That night, Matilda lay in the large bed that still smelled faintly of Kieran, a clean scent of soap and something uniquely him. In the quiet darkness, she allowed herself to wonder what kind of life they might build together. This rugged rancher and the disgraced schoolteacher carrying another man's child. The days that followed established a tentative routine. Kieran rose before dawn, working from sunup to sundown with only brief appearances at mealtimes. Matilda, accustomed to teaching, found herself at loose ends until she began cataloging the books in his study and reorganizing the kitchen to her liking. Mrs. Guthrie, the housekeeper, proved to be a weathered woman of about 60 with sharp eyes and few words. She showed no surprise at Kieran's sudden marriage nor any judgment of Matilda's condition, treating the new Mrs. Thornton with gruff respect. Mr. Thornton's a good man, she said on her second visit, as she kneaded bread dough with strong, veined hands. Not one for foolishness or fancy talk, but his word is iron. If he's claimed that baby as his blessing, then that's what it is. Matilda paused in arranging dried herbs. You've known him long? Since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, Mrs. Guthrie replied. Worked for his parents before him. Saw him grow from a wild boy to the man he is. Saw what happened with Hannah too. He mentioned her, Matilda said carefully. Mrs. Guthrie nodded. Nearly broke him. But the Thornton men don't break easy, they just get quieter. She gave Matilda an appraising look. He's been alone too long. Maybe you and that baby are what he needs. By the end of the first week, Matilda had ventured out to explore the ranch properly. Kieran found her in the stables one afternoon, speaking softly to a gentle mare. That's Willow, he said, startling her. She'd be good for you to ride, once. Well, later. Matilda stroked the horse's velvety nose. I'd like that. I've never had much opportunity to ride, but I'd like to learn. He studied her for a moment. Would you like to see more of the ranch? We could take the buggy if you're feeling up to it. The invitation surprised her. It was the first time he'd suggested they spend time together beyond their quiet meals. I'd like that very much, she replied. Kieran harnessed Willow to a small buggy and helped Matilda up to the seat. They rode across pasture land where cattle grazed, past a creek that provided water year-round, and up to a ridge that overlooked the entire operation. It's magnificent, Matilda said, taking in the sweeping vista. You've built something truly remarkable here. We have good water, decent grazing, and I've been fortunate with my breeding stock, he replied, though she caught a hint of pride in his voice. My father claimed this land when there was nothing but Apache territory for 100 miles. Had to make peace with them first. He learned their language, respected their boundaries. They left him alone mostly. Are they still nearby? Some. The reservation's about 30 miles east. Old Chief Broken Lance still remembers my father. Comes by sometimes to trade. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. Matilda became aware of Kieran's stealing glances at her profile. Is something wrong? She asked. He shook his head. Just noticing that you look more rested than when you first came. It suits you. The compliment, however simple, brought warmth to her cheeks. Thank you. I feel more at peace here than I have in months. As they drove back toward the house, a movement on the horizon caught their attention. Riders approached 3 men on horseback, coming fast. Kieran's expression darkened. Stay in the buggy, he instructed, pulling a rifle from beneath the seat and standing to better see the approaching men. Matilda's heart raced as the riders drew near. She recognized the lead man as Sheriff Barrett from Copper Creek, accompanied by 2 deputies. Thornton, the sheriff called as they reined in their horses. Need to have a word with you and the missus. Sheriff, Kieran acknowledged coolly. What brings you all this way? Barrett dismounted, his gaze shifting between Kieran and Matilda. Got some questions about this hasty marriage of yours. Received a telegram from back east. Seems your new wife might have left some trouble behind her. Matilda felt the blood drain from her face. Kieran's hand moved to rest on her shoulder, a gesture both protective and reassuring. My wife's past is her own business, Kieran said evenly, and our marriage is legitimate and binding. That may be, Barrett replied. But when a prominent Boston family starts asking questions, it's my job to find answers. Who contacted you? Matilda asked, finding her voice. Man named Edward Blackwell. Claims you absconded with family property before disappearing west. The name sent a chill through Matilda. Edward, her child's father, was looking for her. But why? And why now? That's a lie, she said firmly. I took nothing that wasn't mine to take. Barrett shrugged. Maybe so, but I still need to file a report. And Mrs. Whitaker is raising questions about the timing of this marriage. Some folks are suggesting it's a cover for previous indiscretions. Kieran's jaw tightened visibly. Sheriff, my wife is expecting our first child. Any indiscretions, as you call them, were between a husband and wife before God. Now, unless you have an actual warrant or charge to bring, I'll thank you to leave my property. The confrontation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Finally, Barrett remounted his horse. This isn't over, Thornton. Boston money talks loud, even out here. After they rode away, Kieran helped Matilda down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. Edward found me, she whispered, trembling slightly. After all this time. He won't touch you, Kieran promised, his voice low and fierce. Not you, not the child. You're my wife now, and no one, not Edward Blackwell, not Mrs. Whitaker, not the whole town of Copper Creek, is going to change that. For the first time since she'd met him, Matilda saw raw emotion in Kieran Thornton's eyes. It wasn't pity or obligation that drove him now, but something deeper, more primal. The realization both frightened and thrilled her. That night at dinner, Kieran broke their usual silence. We should discuss what happens next, he said. This Blackwell fellow, he might not stop with sending telegrams. Matilda set down her fork. You're right. I should have known he wouldn't simply let me disappear. What does he want? If it's money, it's not money, she interrupted. Edward comes from wealth. His family owns textile mills all over New England. She hesitated, then continued. I think he's afraid I'll claim the child as his. It would ruin his engagement to my cousin Margaret if the scandal came to light. Kieran considered this. Then we give him no reason to pursue you. We make sure everyone knows this child is a Thornton, born and raised. How do we do that? We show Copper Creek a united front. Starting Sunday, we attend church together. We visit town as husband and wife. We make it clear that our marriage is real and our family is established. Matilda felt a flutter of anxiety. They'll be cruel. Some will, he agreed. But others might surprise you. And those who remain cruel will learn there's a price for targeting my family. The conviction in his voice gave her courage. Very well. Sunday it is. The church in Copper Creek was packed that Sunday morning when Kieran and Matilda Thornton walked through the doors. A wave of whispers rippled through the congregation as Kieran guided his visibly pregnant wife to a pew near the front, his hand resting protectively at the small of her back. Reverend Williams, to his credit, welcomed them warmly, making a point to congratulate the newlyweds publicly before beginning his sermon. Throughout the service, Matilda felt the weight of stares on her back, but Kieran's solid presence beside her helped her maintain her composure. After the service, they faced the gauntlet of town society. Mrs. Whitaker made a show of steering her daughter away, while others pretended not to see them. But some, like Dr. Harrison and his wife, approached with genuine smiles. Mrs. Thornton, the doctor greeted her. I hope you'll consider allowing me to attend you when your time comes. My wife assists me, and I assure you we provide the best care possible. Before Matilda could respond, a strident voice cut through the churchyard. Well, if it isn't the happy couple. Mrs. Jenkins, the general store owner's wife, approached with several other women. Tell me, Mrs. Thornton, how does it feel to trap one of the territory's most eligible bachelors? Kieran stiffened beside her, but Matilda squeezed his arm gently. Mrs. Jenkins, she replied with a calm she didn't entirely feel. I can assure you that my husband made his proposal freely and with full knowledge of my circumstances. His generosity of spirit puts many who claim Christian charity to shame. Mrs. Jenkins flushed angrily. I suppose the child will conveniently arrive early, yet somehow be fully developed? The child, Kieran interjected, his voice dangerously quiet, is my blessing and my responsibility. Any suggestion otherwise is not only insulting to my wife, but to me. I wouldn't advise continuing down that path, Mrs. Jenkins. The steely undertone in his voice caused several onlookers to shift uncomfortably. Mr. Jenkins appeared at his wife's side, looking embarrassed. Eliza, we should be going, he muttered, taking her arm. As they walked away, Matilda released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, she said softly. No need for thanks, Kieran replied. You defended us first. His use of us sent an unexpected warmth through her. Somehow, in the span of less than 2 weeks, they had become a unit partners facing the world together. They completed their visit to town by stopping at the general store, where Kieran pointedly made several large purchases, and at the doctor's office to schedule a future appointment. By the time they headed home, Matilda felt emotionally drained but strangely victorious. You were magnificent, Kieran told her as they drove home. I've never seen anyone handle Eliza Jenkins so effectively. I was terrified, Matilda admitted. But I couldn't let her insult you, not when you've risked so much for me. He glanced at her, his expression softening. It doesn't feel like a risk anymore, Tilly. The use of her nickname, spoken with such gentle familiarity, caused her heart to skip. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that this marriage of convenience might evolve into something more genuine, perhaps not the passionate romance of novels, but a true partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. That evening, as summer heat lingered after sunset, they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Kieran brought out a bottle of elderberry wine and poured her a small glass. Dr. Harrison says a little is permissible, he explained when she hesitated, to celebrate surviving your first Sunday as Mrs. Thornton. She accepted the glass with a smile. It does feel like an accomplishment. They sipped in companionable silence until Kieran spoke again. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Yes. Would you consider continuing to teach? Not in town, he added quickly, but here. There are ranch hands with children who get little schooling, and some of the neighboring homesteaders have young ones too. We have that empty room upstairs that would make a fine classroom. Matilda stared at him, touched beyond words that he'd considered her vocation. You'd want me to teach? Only if you wish to, he said. And perhaps not right away after the baby comes and you've had time to recover. But I thought it might give you purpose beyond just being my wife. I would love that, she said earnestly. I've missed teaching terribly. Then it settled. He raised his glass in a small toast. To the future Thornton Academy. She laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that seemed to please him immensely. Hardly an academy, but yes, to teaching again. As the weeks passed, their relationship evolved with cautious, gentle steps. Kieran began inviting Matilda to ride with him on his morning inspections of the closer pastures. He taught her about cattle breeding, water management, and the seasonal rhythms of ranch life. In turn, she organized his account books, corresponded with cattle buyers, and brought a woman's touch to the house that had been lacking for so long. Mrs. Guthrie noted the changes with approval. Never seen the place so lively, she commented one day. Or the boss so content. Matilda's pregnancy progressed, her body growing heavier as summer gave way to fall. Kieran surprised her by arriving one evening with a rocking chair he'd commissioned from the carpenter in town. For when the baby comes, he explained, almost shyly. My mother always said a proper nursery needs a rocking chair. Matilda ran her hand over the smooth wood, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. It's beautiful, Kieran. Thank you. He helped her settle into it, his hands lingering on her shoulders. Does it feel right? Perfect, she assured him. Later that week, they received an unexpected visitor. Chief Broken Lance, the elderly Apache leader Kieran had mentioned, arrived with his grandson. Kieran welcomed them with obvious respect, speaking a few halting words in their language before introducing Matilda. The old chief studied her with keen black eyes, noting her advanced pregnancy. He spoke to Kieran in Apache, gesturing toward Matilda with what seemed like a question. He asks if our child is strong, Kieran translated. The Apache believe a child carries the strength of both parents. Matilda hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on her belly. Tell him yes. Our child is very strong. Kieran's gaze met hers, something unspoken passing between them before he translated her words. The chief nodded approvingly and spoke again at length. He says his wife will come before the snow falls to help with the birth, Kieran explained. She is known for her skill as a midwife. Tell him I would be honored, Matilda replied sincerely. That evening, after their visitors had departed with gifts of coffee, sugar, and cloth in exchange for beautifully tanned deer hides, Matilda found Kieran in his study staring thoughtfully at a worn photograph. Your parents? She asked, noticing the formal portrait of a stern-looking couple. He nodded. Taken in St. Louis before they came west. My father was already planning this ranch, though everyone thought he was mad to consider it. Matilda sat across from him. You called the baby our child today, when speaking to Chief Broken Lance. Kieran set the photograph down. I did. Did you mean it? His eyes met hers directly. Yes, if you'll allow it. I'd like to be more than just a name to this child. I'd like to be a true father. Emotion welled in Matilda's throat. I can think of no better man to father my child, she said softly. Later that night, as Matilda prepared for bed, a sharp pain seized her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the bedpost for support as it intensified, then gradually subsided. When it happened again 20 minutes later, she knew with certainty the baby was coming, nearly 3 weeks earlier than expected. She made her way to Kieran's room, knocking urgently. He answered immediately, as if he hadn't been sleeping. The baby, she managed. It's time. The calm efficiency with which he responded surprised her. Within minutes, he had sent a ranch hand galloping toward town for Dr. Harrison, prepared the bedroom with extra linens, and heated water in the kitchen. Kieran, she said between increasingly painful contractions, I'm afraid. He sat beside her on the bed, taking her hand in his. I'm right here, Tilly. I won't leave you. But you don't have to stay for this part, she protested weakly. Most men don't. I'm not most men, he replied simply. And you're not alone anymore. The labor progressed rapidly. Dr. Harrison arrived just as Matilda entered the final stages, bringing his wife to assist. Kieran reluctantly moved to the hallway, pacing anxiously as Matilda's cries grew more intense. Just before dawn, a new cry joined hers, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Kieran froze, his heart pounding as Dr. Harrison opened the door, his sleeves rolled up and a broad smile on his face. Congratulations, Mr. Thornton. You have a healthy daughter. Kieran entered the room in a daze. Matilda lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, but her face radiant as she cradled a tiny bundle. She looked up as he approached, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. Kieran, come meet your daughter. He sat gently on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed as Matilda placed the swaddled infant in his arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair and skin still mottled from birth, but to Kieran, she was the most perfect creature he'd ever seen. She's beautiful, he whispered, a finger gently stroking the impossibly soft cheek. Just like her mother. Mrs. Harrison tactfully ushered her husband from the room, giving the new family a moment of privacy. I thought we might name her Sarah, Matilda said tentatively. After your mother. If that's all right. Kieran looked up, deeply moved by the gesture. Sarah, he repeated. It's perfect. As the first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the window, Kieran Thornton held his wife's hand and gazed down at the child who, though not of his blood, had completely claimed his heart. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he would die protecting them both. I love you, he said suddenly, the words surprising even him with their honesty. Both of you. Matilda's eyes widened. They had built a partnership, developed a friendship, even shared moments of tenderness, but neither had spoken of love. Kieran, she began, uncertain. You don't need to say anything, he assured her quickly. I just wanted you to know. Whatever brought us together, convenience, circumstance, fate, my feelings now are real. Matilda reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood up for me in that saloon, she confessed. I just didn't dare hope you might feel the same. He turned his face to kiss her palm, a gesture of such tender intimacy that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. We'll do this together, he promised. All of it. News of Sarah Thornton's birth spread quickly through Copper Creek and the surrounding ranches. To Matilda's surprise, several women from neighboring homesteads came to call, bringing gifts for the baby and casseroles for the new parents. Even Mrs. Guthrie showed a softer side, cooing over the infant and instructing Kieran on the proper way to swaddle his daughter. 2 weeks after Sarah's birth, Matilda was sitting in the new rocking chair nursing the baby when Kieran entered with an unusual expression on his face. "Sheriff Barrett is here," he said quietly. "And he's not alone." Matilda clutched Sarah tighter. "Edward," Kieran nodded grimly. "And a lawyer from Boston. They're waiting in the study." "What do they want?" "To speak with you." His voice hardened. "But you don't have to see them if you don't wish to." Matilda considered her options. Running or hiding would only postpone the inevitable. "No, I'll speak with them. But not alone." "Never alone," Kieran assured her. After Sarah finished nursing, Matilda handed the drowsy infant to Kieran, who cradled her with practiced ease. Together, they went to confront the visitors. Edward Blackwell had aged in the months since Matilda had last seen him, or perhaps it was simply that she now saw him clearly. His handsome features seemed harder, his eyes colder as they fixed first on her, then on the baby in Kieran's arms. "Matilda," he said, his Boston accent pronounced in the single word. "You're looking well." "Mr. Blackwell," she replied formally. "What brings you all the way to Arizona territory?" The lawyer, a thin man with spectacles and a perpetual frown, stepped forward. "Mrs. Thornton, I am Abraham Holcomb, representing the Blackwell family. We have reason to believe that child," he gestured towards Sarah, "may have a claim on the Blackwell estate." Kieran's posture stiffened, but Matilda placed a calming hand on his arm. "My daughter has no claim on the Blackwells," she stated clearly. "As you can see, she is a Thornton, born in wedlock to my husband and me." Edward's face flushed with anger. "Don't play games, Matilda. We both know that child was conceived before you ever met this rancher." Sheriff Barrett shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting his role in this confrontation. "Mr. Blackwell," Kieran said, his voice deceptively calm, "I suggest you watch how you speak about my wife and daughter in my home." The lawyer intervened smoothly. "We have no intention of causing a scene, Mr. Thornton. My client simply wishes to ensure that if the child is indeed his, proper arrangements are made." "Proper arrangements?" Matilda repeated incredulously. "You mean buying our silence? Ensuring your precious engagement isn't tainted by scandal?" Edward had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Margaret and I are to be married next spring. Her family would be devastated to learn the truth," Matilda finished for him. "That their future son-in-law seduced the cousin, then abandoned her when she needed him most." "I offered to help you discreetly," Edward protested. "A home somewhere quiet, an allowance. You offered to hide me away like something shameful," Matilda corrected. "To deny your own child while maintaining your reputation." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thornton, regardless of past circumstances, we are prepared to offer a substantial settlement if you will sign a document relinquishing any future claims against the Blackwell family." Kieran spoke before Matilda could respond. "My wife needs no settlement. My daughter needs no Blackwell money. What they have is my name, my protection, and my love." Edward studied Kieran with narrowed eyes. "You'd raise another man's child as your own? Claim her publicly." "I already have," Kieran replied, looking down at the sleeping infant in his arms with undisguised affection. "Sarah is my daughter in every way that matters." Matilda felt a surge of love for this man who had become so much more than a convenient husband. "Edward, go home. Marry Margaret. Build your life. Sarah and I have our family here." For a moment, something like regret flickered across Edward's face. He looked at the baby again, perhaps seeing something of himself in her features. Then his expression hardened once more. "Very well. Sign the papers, and we'll trouble you no further." The lawyer produced a document, which Kieran insisted on reading thoroughly before allowing Matilda to consider it. The terms were simple. In exchange for a sum of $5,000, Matilda would agree never to make any claim of paternity or seek support from the Blackwell family. The money would be Sarah's dowry someday, Edward said, a final attempt at justification. Matilda looked to Kieran, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I'll sign," she said, "not for the money, but for the promise that you'll never return, never try to claim her later when it might suit you." Once the papers were signed and the bank draft handed over, Edward hesitated at the door. "She does have my eyes," he said quietly. "No," Kieran corrected him. She has her mother's eyes, and a father who will teach her to use them to see the truth in people. After they departed, Matilda collapsed into Kieran's arms, emotionally drained. Is it really over? It's over, he assured her, holding both her and Sarah in a protective embrace. He won't be back. That night, for the first time since their marriage, Kieran moved from the spare room back to the master bedroom. There was no discussion, no awkwardness, just the natural progression of a relationship that had grown from arrangement to deep affection. As they lay side by side in the darkness, the baby sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, Matilda turned to face her husband. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He traced the outline of her face with gentle fingers. "No more thanks between us, remember? We're partners in this life." "Partners," she agreed, leaning forward to kiss him a real kiss, tender and sweet and full of promise. The seasons turned, and Sarah Thornton grew from infant to toddler under the watchful eyes of adoring parents. True to his word, Kieran helped Matilda establish a small school in their home, which soon attracted children from throughout the valley. Twice a week, Matilda taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history to a dozen eager students ranging from 5 to 16 years old. On Sarah's first birthday, they hosted a celebration that brought together ranch hands, neighboring families, and even a few townsfolk from Copper Creek who had gradually warmed to the Thorntons. Chief Broken Lance and his wife came bearing a tiny buckskin dress adorned with beautiful beadwork, which Sarah wore proudly as she took her first tentative steps between her parents' outstretched hands. "She's strong," the old chief observed approvingly. Like her father, Kieran, who now understood more Apache than he let on, smiled and replied, "And wise, like her mother." The chief's wife, who had indeed assisted at Sarah's birth as promised, nodded sagely. "This child walks between two worlds. She will bring them together." As twilight fell and the guests departed, Kieran found Matilda standing on the porch, watching the last golden rays of sunlight paint the distant mountains. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Completely," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Though sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life. A year ago, I was alone and afraid. Now," she turned in his arms to face him, "now I have everything I never dared hope for." His kiss was tender, familiar, yet still thrilling after a year of marriage. "I have news," he said when they parted. "I received a letter today from the territorial governor. They're establishing a proper school in Copper Creek, with funding for a real schoolhouse and teacher's salary. They've asked if you'd consider taking the position." Matilda's eyes widened. "After everything that happened?" "The committee has been disbanded," Kieran finished with satisfaction. "Mrs. Whitaker's husband lost the bank to Eastern investors, and they've moved to California. The new bank manager's wife is on the town council now, and she specifically requested you." "I don't know what to say," Matilda breathed. "Teaching here has been wonderful, but a real school with proper resources." "You don't have to decide immediately," he assured her. "And whatever you choose, I'll support you completely." Later that night, after Sarah was asleep, Matilda found Kieran in his study reviewing cattle contracts. She closed the door behind her, a nervous smile playing at her lips. "I've been thinking about the teaching position," she began. He set down his papers, giving her his full attention. "And I'd like to accept, but with one condition." She twisted her hands together, suddenly shy. "I'd want to bring Sarah with me, at least for now. And any other children we might have." Kieran went very still. "Other children?" Matilda took a deep breath. "I've suspected for a few weeks now. Dr. Harrison confirmed it today. We're going to have another baby, Kieran, in the spring." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, even before he crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated in wonder. "Our baby." "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Truly ours." As winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, the Thornton family continued to flourish. Sarah, now a precocious toddler with her mother's dark curls and curious nature, developed an early fascination with books and animals alike. Matilda divided her time between teaching at the new Copper Creek schoolhouse and preparing for the arrival of their second child. Kieran expanded the ranch operations, hiring additional hands and purchasing adjoining land when it became available. The Thornton name became synonymous with quality cattle and fair business practices throughout the territory. When visitors came to Copper Creek asking about property or investment opportunities, they were invariably directed to consult with Kieran Thornton first. On a warm June evening in 1881, as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Matilda gave birth to a son. Kieran paced the porch with Sarah in his arms, telling her stories to distract them both from the sounds coming from within the house. When Dr. Harrison finally emerged with the news, Kieran's legs nearly buckled with relief and joy. "A healthy boy," the doctor announced. "And Mrs. Thornton is doing splendidly." Inside, Matilda sat propped against pillows, her face radiant despite her exhaustion as she cradled their newborn son. Sarah clambered onto the bed with her father's help, peering curiously at her baby brother. "Sarah, meet James," Matilda said softly. "James, this is your big sister who's going to help look after you." "He's very red," Sarah observed seriously, causing both parents to laugh. "All babies are red at first," Kieran explained, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You were too." Sarah looked skeptical but reached out a tentative finger to touch her brother's tiny hand. To everyone's delight, the baby's fingers curled reflexively around his sister's. "He likes me," Sarah exclaimed. "Of course he does," Matilda assured her. "You're his sister." As Kieran gazed at his family, his wife, the daughter of his heart, and now the son of his blood, he felt a profound sense of completion. From the moment he'd stepped into that saloon and defended a woman he barely knew, his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. "We did good, didn't we?" he said quietly to Matilda when Sarah had finally been persuaded to let the baby rest. "We did," she agreed, reaching for his hand. "Though I think we have Mrs. Jenkins to thank, in a way." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure that?" "If she and the others hadn't been so cruel that day, you might never have stepped in. We might never have found each other." He considered this, then shook his head. "I'd have found you somehow. I believe that. Some things are just meant to be." Later that summer, the Thorntons hosted a christening celebration for baby James. The entire community turned out ranch hands and their families, neighboring homesteaders, townspeople from Copper Creek, and even Chief Broken Lance with members of his extended family. As Reverend Williams performed the ceremony, Matilda looked around at the gathering. So many faces that had once shown judgment now offered friendship and acceptance. Her gaze found Kieran, standing tall and proud with Sarah perched on his shoulders, his eyes never leaving her and their infant son. She thought of the journey that had brought them here, from shame and loneliness to love and family, from judgment to blessing. The road had not been easy, but every step had led to this moment of perfect belonging. When the Reverend asked who would guide this child in the ways of faith and love, Kieran's voice rang out clear and strong. "We will." His family, his community. And as the crowd responded with a hearty amen, Matilda knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, surrounded by love, accepted for who she was, and blessed beyond measure. In the years that followed, the Thornton family continued to grow in both numbers and influence. Sarah, with her quick mind and compassionate heart, followed in her mother's footsteps, eventually taking over the school in Copper Creek when Matilda retired to focus on raising their younger children. James grew into a strong, thoughtful young man who worked alongside his father, learning the ranching business from the ground up. 2 more children joined the family, twin girls who arrived on a snowy December night in 1883, bringing joy and chaos in equal measure. Through it all, Kieran and Matilda's love deepened and matured, weathering the inevitable storms of life with the strength of a partnership forged in adversity and sealed with love. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes sit on the porch swing Kieran had built when Sarah was small, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky while their children played in the yard. In those moments, Matilda would often think of that day in the saloon when a stranger had stood up for her, claiming her unborn child as his blessing too. "What are you smiling about?" Kieran would ask, his own face lined now with years of sun and laughter. And Matilda would simply take his hand, the same strong hand that had helped her up from shame all those years ago, and reply, "Everything, my love. Absolutely everything."